Welcome back to Justice Reloaded HD, where every story begins not with a headline, but with a heartbeat. Before we dive in today, let me ask you something simple. Did you remember to drink a warm glass of water this morning? Sometimes, the smallest things we do for ourselves are the ones that keep us going. Take care of yourself, okay? Now, let me tell you a story. It started with a jacket. Just an ordinary piece of clothing, really. But the way it was offered, the way it was received, it changed everything for two souls who had forgotten what safety felt like. If you believe that everyday moments can carry extraordinary meaning, if your heart finds comfort in stories of kindness, healing, and second chances, then go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. We're here every week with stories that just might warm your heart, or even change your life. It was a chilly morning in Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of morning where the air hangs thick with the smell of salt from the nearby harbor and the promise of warmth comes only from a cup of fresh brewed coffee. On a quiet corner near King Street, nestled between a laundromat and a hardware store, stood a modest little diner called Maple and Main. Its red vinyl booths had cracked with age, and the linoleum floors bore the wear of 100,000 footsteps, but there was comfort in its imperfections. The kind of place where the coffee was always hot, the grits were always creamy, and the regulars didn't need to read the menu. Gregory Hale sat at the booth farthest from the window, as he always did. 62 years old, with streaks of silver in his thick hair and the permanent set of sorrow around his eyes, Gregory was the kind of man who commanded a room without ever asking for it. He wasn't flashy like most billionaires. No designer logos. No entourage. Just a wool coat, well-worn leather gloves, and a distant look that suggested his mind was always somewhere else, somewhere far from this little diner and the city it belonged to. Once, Gregory had built an empire, consumer goods, household staples, the kind of things people used every single day without ever thinking of the man behind them. But behind the scenes, tragedy had cut through his success like a blade. His wife had passed 5 years earlier. Cancer, swift and merciless. And ever since, Gregory had retreated into himself, focusing solely on his son, Noah. Noah Hale was 10 years old, with sandy blonde hair, deep hazel eyes, and the kind of stillness that didn't belong to children. He had been paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident that also left him with deep emotional trauma. Doctors said he had a condition known as tactile defensiveness, a heightened sensitivity to touch. Even a friendly pat on the shoulder could make him flinch. He hated being touched by strangers. Sometimes even by his own father. Most days, he communicated with nods and gestures, speaking only when he absolutely had to. Every Saturday morning, Gregory brought Noah to Maple and Main. Not because the food was exceptional, it wasn't. But because it was the only place in the city where Noah had once smiled years ago, when a cook accidentally dropped a pancake in the shape of a dinosaur on his plate. Gregory never forgot that smile. So they kept coming back, hoping maybe, just maybe, it would happen again. And then there was Samantha Rivers. She was 35, with dark curls always pulled into a low ponytail and a voice that could make even the grumpiest old man at the counter soften. She'd been working at the diner for almost 6 years, long enough to remember people's orders, their stories, and the names of their grandkids. But there was more to Samantha than just a kind smile and a coffee pot. She had spent most of her 20s raising her younger brother, Jacob, who had been born with a spinal disorder. Dressing him, feeding him, lifting him in and out of bed, it had been a part of her daily life. She understood wheelchairs. She understood hesitation. And most of all, she understood what it meant to carry invisible weight. She had noticed the father and son for months, always quiet, always distant. But that morning, something subtle was about to shift. The breakfast rush had settled into a gentle lull. Plates clinked, silverware scraped, and the smell of bacon hung faintly in the air. At booth 7, Gregory finished his last sip of black coffee while Noah, sitting beside him in his wheelchair, quietly stared at the window, his jacket folded beside him. When Gregory stood to pay the check, A small shift of Noah's hand sent the jacket tumbling to the floor. Before Gregory could react, Samantha appeared. She had been refilling mugs a few tables over, but her eyes had caught the fall. She walked over, crouched slowly, not rushing, not startling the boy, and picked up the jacket as though it were something delicate, something sacred. She looked up at Noah, her voice soft and warm. "Hey there," she said gently. "Would it be okay if I helped you with this? I used to help my little brother with his jacket. He was really good at choosing which sleeve to start with." Noah didn't speak, but his gaze lingered on her. No fear, no flinch, just a pause, and then slowly, he gave a single nod. Samantha smiled, careful and calm. She held the jacket open, letting him move at his own pace. Her fingers guided the sleeves, but never rushed. It wasn't just dressing, it was trust being earned, second by second. A few feet away, Gregory stood frozen. His eyes locked on his son, not because he was being helped, but because he wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, someone other than him had touched Noah, and Noah had let them. And something inside Gregory shifted. The next morning, Samantha arrived at the diner just before dawn, as she always did. The kitchen lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the scent of ground coffee greeted her like an old friend. She tied her apron, expecting another ordinary Tuesday, eggs over easy, decaf refills, maybe a few smiles traded with the regulars. But waiting outside, parked along the curb where delivery trucks usually idled, was a sleek black sedan. The kind of car that didn't belong on their street. A uniformed driver stepped out, holding a thick envelope with her name handwritten across the front in neat, block letters. "Miss Samantha Rivers?" he asked politely. She blinked. "Yeah, that's me." The driver handed her the envelope, nodded, and returned to the car without another word. Inside was a letter on thick, cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was elegant but steady, measured, like the man who had written it. "Ms. Rivers, I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday. Not for the service, which was as warm and professional as always, but for something deeper. You helped my son feel safe. That doesn't happen. Not with anyone. Not in years. If you're willing, I'd like to hire you, not as a waitress, but as someone who can simply spend time with Noah. No expectations. No pressure. Just presence. Sincerely, Gregory Hale." Samantha read the letter twice, then once more, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. Flattered? Nervous? A little of both. The offer was generous, and not just in tone. Tucked inside the envelope was a folded check. The number written on it made her stomach twist. She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded the check neatly, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in her locker. She didn't know how to say no, but she wasn't ready to say yes either. That night, as she closed her shift, she found something unusual taped to the door of her car. It was a piece of paper, clearly drawn by a child. On it was a rough but sweet sketch of a jacket. The zipper was half drawn, and two small hands were tugging it upward, guided by a larger pair. At the bottom, in blocky, uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping me, Noah." Samantha sat in the driver's seat, holding the drawing against her chest. Her eyes welled, not because of the money or the gesture, but because of what it meant. She had made a difference. Not a big, world-changing one, but something quiet and real, to a boy who had forgotten how to trust. The next morning, she didn't call. She didn't text. She simply showed up. Gregory opened the front door of his house, surprised but composed. His home was stately but not ostentatious, high ceilings, warm wood tones, and the scent of cedar in the air. "You came," he said. "I'm not here for the check," she replied, holding up the envelope. "You can keep it." He looked at her, unsure. "I'm here because that boy matters. And I think he knows I mean it." Gregory nodded slowly, something almost like relief washing over his face. Samantha glanced down the hallway, where soft wheels could be heard rolling against hardwood. "I brought puzzles," she said quietly. "And a backup jacket. Just in case." And with that she stepped inside, not as an employee, not as a charity case, but as someone who, for the first time in a long time, felt truly necessary. Each morning, just as the sunlight began to filter through the tall windows of the Hale residence, Samantha arrived. Not with fanfare or formality, but with a quiet sense of purpose. She always brought the same tote bag, worn canvas, frayed at the seams, filled with small items, a deck of flashcards, colorful stickers, 2 jackets, one red, one blue, and a little box of fabric patches shaped like animals. Her sessions with Noah never looked like therapy, though in many ways they were. They started with something simple: choice. "Which one today?" she'd ask, holding up both jackets. Noah would eye them carefully, sometimes pointing, sometimes whispering the color. Once he said, "The one with the bear on the sleeve," and Samantha had smiled so wide it startled the family dog. Then came the game. Samantha never just dressed him. She made it into a kind of dance. She called it the arm adventure. "All right, Commander Noah," she'd say, crouching beside his wheelchair. "We have 2 tunnels to explore. Which one do we send the brave arm through first?" Noah would giggle, quietly at first, like he didn't quite trust the sound coming out of him. But each time, it grew louder, freer. One arm would stretch out, then the next. Sometimes, he would even lift his shoulders slightly, or wiggle his fingers to help guide the fabric. Samantha never praised too much. She knew children like Noah, ones who had been handled, pitted, overcorrected. They didn't want to be made into heroes for doing ordinary things. So instead, she acknowledged the effort with a nod, a wink, or just a shared look that said, "You did that. And I saw it." Gradually, Noah began to change. One morning, before she could even ask, he reached into the tote and pulled out the red jacket himself. Another day, he whispered, "I want the blue one. It's softer." Gregory watched all this from the doorway some mornings, pretending to be engrossed in his newspaper. But his eyes betrayed him, lifting every time Noah made a sound, or moved just a little more than he had the day before. The change wasn't dramatic. It was slow, like water soaking into dry earth. But it was real. Noah began saying small things, simple words at first, like yes, no again. Then came phrases, "My arm feels weird today," or "Can we play the zipper game again?" And perhaps most importantly, he smiled. Not the stiff, forced smile of politeness, but the kind of smile that starts in the eyes, then softens the whole face. A smile that Samantha returned without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting all morning just to see it. She never asked about his past. Never pushed for more than he was ready to give. But day by day, she earned something precious, not just his trust, but his participation in the world again. And Gregory, quietly and cautiously, began to hope. It happened on a Thursday morning. Gregory had just finished a conference call upstairs when he heard something he hadn't heard in years, a sound so unfamiliar, so foreign to the rhythm of his home, that he paused mid-sentence and stood perfectly still. Laughter. Not a chuckle from a podcast. Not polite laughter from a guest. But a child's laugh. Noah's laugh. It was light and uneven, like someone learning how to ride a bike. The kind of sound that bounced off walls and left warmth in its wake. Gregory slowly made his way down the hall and stood just outside the living room, out of sight. Inside, Samantha was sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding up a tiny foam crown made from an arts and crafts kit. Noah was giggling uncontrollably, his shoulders bouncing as Samantha tried to place the crooked crown on his head without it falling off. "There," she declared dramatically. "King Noah the Brave. Ruler of all jackets." Noah clapped once, then grinned. "All jackets," he repeated, still laughing. Gregory's throat tightened. He hadn't heard his son laugh, not like that, since before the accident. Even then, Noah had been a quiet boy. But this laughter was different. Unburdened. Free. Later that day, during a regular household staff meeting, Gregory mentioned how pleased he was with Noah's progress. He wasn't expecting resistance, but it came anyway, from Charles, the estate's senior manager. A man who had worked for the Hale family for over 2 decades and had seen every therapist, specialist, and child development expert pass through their doors. "With all due respect, sir," Charles said carefully, "Ms. Rivers is not a licensed therapist. She doesn't have formal training in child psychology. If this were to become a long-term arrangement, there could be liability issues. Public perception. Expectations." Gregory set down his pen, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "You're right," he said calmly. "She's not a therapist." Charles seemed momentarily satisfied, until Gregory continued. "She doesn't have a degree in behavior science. She's never studied the anatomy of trauma or run a formal assessment." A pause. "But she's the first person in years who made my son laugh. She's the only person he's let touch him without panic. And maybe most importantly," he added, voice low and certain, "she's the only one who doesn't make him feel like he's being treated." Charles looked unsure how to respond. Gregory leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I've paid specialists 6 figures to get my son to say hello." She got him to smile over a paper crown. The room fell quiet. "She sees him," Gregory said, almost to himself. "Not his file. Not his chair. Him." And with that, the discussion ended. The storm didn't come from the sky, it came from a headline. It started as a whisper on a gossip blog, buried beneath celebrity rumors and photos of overpriced handbags. But it spread like wildfire, gaining traction as people shared it with little care for accuracy. "Billionaire hires waitress to dress disabled son. Is this care or control?" The article was filled with half-truths and anonymous sources. A blurry photo showed Samantha kneeling beside Noah's wheelchair, her hands adjusting the collar of his jacket. It had been taken from a distance, likely through a fence or hedge. There were no names mentioned, but the implication was clear and cruel. By noon, Gregory's phone was vibrating nonstop. Emails from board members. Messages from investors. PR representatives asking how to respond. His staff tried to contain the fallout, but the damage had already settled into the cracks of his carefully guarded life. He sat in his study, jaw tight, the article glowing on his screen. Samantha's image stared back at him, harmless, gentle, frozen in an act of care. But all he could see was betrayal. How had this gotten out? She had been kind, trusted, brought into his home, into his son's fragile world. And now the world was watching, speculating, judging. Without hesitation, Gregory shut his laptop and made a decision. One built not from logic, but from fear. He canceled Samantha's upcoming visits. No explanation. No warning. Just silence. When she arrived the next morning, the gates wouldn't open. A staff member greeted her at the curb, apologizing stiffly, saying, "Mr. Hale won't be needing your services any longer." Samantha didn't argue. She didn't cry. But something in her chest twisted, less from the dismissal itself, and more from what it implied. He didn't trust her. After everything. She drove home, parked her car, and sat still for a long time. Then, she reached into her glove compartment, pulled out a small notepad, and began to write. The next day, before the morning sun had risen, she returned to the Hale estate one last time. The gates remained closed, but she slipped the folded paper into the mailbox beside the security post and walked away without looking back. Gregory found it later that afternoon. No envelope. No name. Just a single line written in pen, steady and sure. "A jacket is only warm if the person wearing it doesn't feel forced to put it on." He read it once. Then again. The word sat with him like a weight, not heavy in mass, but in meaning. It wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was truth, wrapped in the kind of grace that made it hurt more. But Gregory didn't reach out. pride is a lonely thing. And sometimes, it talks louder than reason. That night, he sat at the dinner table across from Noah, who stared silently at the untouched plate in front of him. The red jacket lay over the back of his wheelchair, sleeves limp, zipper open. Gregory watched him for a long time. But Noah didn't speak. And the house, once again, fell into silence. It wasn't until 3 days later that the truth came to light. Gregory sat across from his legal advisor in his downtown office, scrolling through a security report on his tablet. He had requested a full investigation, not just into the article, but into how the photograph had been taken. He needed to know who had betrayed the sanctity of his home, who had exposed his son for the world to dissect. That's when he saw it. A timestamp. A location. Camera angles mapped from the street behind the property. It hadn't come from inside. A paparazzo had hidden behind the neighbor's hedge, perched with a telephoto lens, and snapped the picture during one of Samantha's morning visits. The article had taken the image and built a story around it. Samantha hadn't leaked anything. She hadn't even known it was taken. Gregory let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His stomach turned with something sharp, regret, maybe. Shame. But the realization came too late. At home, things had already shifted. Noah hadn't worn a jacket in 4 days. Despite the crisp morning air and the cold breeze that snuck through the garden windows, he refused. He sat quietly in his chair, arms crossed, his once cheerful spark dimmed. Gregory had tried. He offered the red jacket. Then the blue one. He even tried Samantha's old trick, the arm adventure. But Noah didn't respond. He didn't giggle. He didn't reach. "Don't want it," the boy mumbled. "It's cold, buddy," Gregory said gently. "You'll feel better with it on." Noah turned his face away. Gregory crouched beside him, the same way Samantha used to. "Can I help you with it?" Noah didn't speak. After a long silence, Gregory asked softly, "Can you tell me why?" Noah finally looked at him, eyes heavier than they should be for a 10-year-old. His voice was quiet, almost afraid of being heard. "Because no one helps me, without making me feel wrong." Gregory froze. The words weren't angry. They weren't even sad. They were just honest. He felt them hit, deep in the chest. All the therapy sessions. All the specialists. All the routines and checklists. They had done what was necessary, but they had never made Noah feel whole. Never made him feel like he was more than a diagnosis. Samantha had. She hadn't just helped him dress. She had made him feel seen. Made him feel capable. She had given him back something no jacket ever could, dignity. Gregory sat on the floor beside his son, the jacket still in his lap. He didn't try again. He didn't speak. He just listened. And in that stillness he saw it clearly, the weight of his own decisions, the pride that had severed a bond his son desperately needed. Samantha hadn't failed them. He had failed her. And maybe, it wasn't too late to make it right. The church gymnasium was packed with volunteers, clothing racks, and the sound of folding tables being set up. Outside, a line of families had already begun to form. Parents holding the hands of children in wheelchairs, teens with walkers, little ones wrapped in oversized coats as the autumn wind picked up. At the far end of the room, Samantha stood beside a stack of folded hoodies, helping a young boy try on a jacket with Velcro sleeves. Her hands moved gently, her voice low and patient, just as it always had been. She didn't see Gregory enter. He paused at the door for a moment, watching her work. She hadn't changed. Same ponytail, same calm energy, same steady presence that had once softened the hardest parts of his home. He approached slowly, hands tucked in the pockets of his coat, and waited until she finished helping the boy before speaking. "Samantha," he said softly. She turned, eyes widening just slightly in surprise. "Gregory. I wasn't sure you'd still be here." She offered a small smile. "Still doing what I know how to do." He nodded, clearing his throat. I owe you more than one apology. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm, but not sharp. I let fear speak louder than truth. I assumed the worst. And I pushed away the one person who truly saw my son. Samantha didn't respond right away. She simply looked at him, waiting. Gregory took a step closer. I used to think Noah didn't like anyone helping him, he said quietly. But the truth is, he just didn't like the way most people tried. That made her pause. He didn't want to be handled, Gregory continued. He wanted to be respected. And somehow, you knew that, without a degree, without a title. You made him feel safe. Whole. Samantha's eyes shimmered, but she held his gaze. I just treated him like a person. That's more than most ever did, he said. A silence passed between them, not awkward, but full. Then Gregory reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder. I've been working on something. With your permission, I'd like you to be a part of it. She opened the folder slowly. Inside were designs, mission statements, logo sketches. At the top of the page, in bold print, second layer, adaptive clothing and confidence for kids who move differently. I want to create something lasting, he said. Something that helps kids like Noah feel proud of the way they get dressed. Not pitted. Empowered. And I can't do it without you. Samantha looked up. Then let's do it right. 2 months later, at the launch event for Second Layer, dozens of families gathered beneath a white tent lined with fall decorations and laughter. On the small stage at the center stood Noah, shoulders back, eyes bright. He wore a gray hoodie designed with magnetic fasteners and extended loops for easier movement. Across the front, in bold letters, was a simple message. Thank you for putting it on with me. The crowd fell quiet. And then slowly, applause broke out. In the front row, Gregory and Samantha sat side by side. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should be. If you believe that even the way a jacket is offered can warm more than just the body, that it can heal hearts and restore trust, then leave us a like. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD so you never miss another story of kindness, hope, and quiet transformation. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you next time.